Hello.
Good morning, or is it for you, I guess? Good morning for you.
It is morning for me, yes.
And I think Julian is here as well, but he's not yet here. And I am recording,
Sure.
but when Julian appears, let's have a conversation about that first thing. There's Julian.
Good to see
If
you.
you said hello, Julian, I can't hear you.
Oh, okay.
Now I can hear you.
How about now?
Now, yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So first off, let me say I'm recording. I would like to record if that's all right with everyone. And the rules for the recording, as far as I'm concerned, is that the recording belongs to the collective unanimously in agreement. So I'll maintain the recording, or anybody else can maintain the recording for that matter, but we won't use it until all of us say unanimously we should use this recording. And at that time we would say, well, this is what I have in mind, and we can have a conversation about that. But so that would be the rules under which I would think it might be useful to record. And what that says is basically you never know whether you want to record something until it's too late. And
Yep.
so let's record, but not give permission to use it.
Okay. Fine by me.
Okay. And second, I would say I haven't met any of you, either of you. I don't think actually in person. So let's bring each other up to date about who we are and how we got here. I have corresponded with Julian quite a lot, I would say, over quite a few years, but I don't think we've ever actually met either live or in person. Is that true?
We had one Zoom call.
Did we have a Zoom call back in the day?
Yeah, we had one Zoom call, but I can introduce myself. Yeah, my name is Julian Bass-Krueger. I studied cognitive science for my master's. Before that, I studied film, and I read about Russ's work in a New York Times article, and I was very intrigued because I've been writing, I've been doing filmmaking that dealt with stream of consciousness. So I was intrigued by that, and I read a lot of his research. And for my master's thesis, I used DES for that thesis. And then I also adapted it slightly to look at slightly longer sections, which me and Russ are kind of in contention about if that's possible to do. But for this project, we're doing regular DES to start. And so I think there are a lot of interesting things that could come of it, but so I learned the method from reading Russ's work, but we haven't collaborated together. So I think it could be interesting to see if we have different perspectives on how to conduct this. And then we can talk about how best to do this method and discuss some technicalities of the method. So yeah, that's a bit about me. I'm from New York, from like upstate New York, but I lived in New York City, went to college there. And now I live in Vienna. Yeah.
Cool.
And what I would say about that is that Julian and I have disagreed about some stuff, and I would hope that if out of this collaboration, one of the things that might come out of this collaboration is that we get to discuss some nuts and bolts of that kind of thing. I don't hold myself up as being the God's expert on DES or on anything else for that matter. And so Julian may very well have some ideas that are better than mine, and I might have some that are better than his. And what I believe, I guess I would say, is that the best way to debate those kinds of things is in the context of an actual real live moment.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would say about that. And Mel, I have heard from, I guess, for the first time a couple months ago. She expressed interest in work, and she can tell us what her interest is.
Yeah, so I came across your work, obviously probably in a similar way to Julian did, and then it just started being a conversation that I was having like super regularly with people, over coffee or at dinner parties, and sort of blowing people's minds. People hadn't even been thinking about, how different their internal experience might be from everyone's. And it often turned out that mine was quite different, I think, to the people that I was discussing with. So it became this like real interesting point of conversation very regularly. So then I was just more interested to learn about it. And then some of the research that you've done with people, Russell, that particularly described unsymbolized thinking, that seemed to be like the first time I'd seen people describe something that felt similar to what I think happens within my brain. So I sort of reached out in the hope that it would just be interesting to, from a personal viewpoint, to just be, I guess, assisted and prodded to find the language to describe what's happening in my head. But then I was very interested creatively to see if there are similarities or differences with people as well. So Julian, maybe a little bit similarly to you, I'm sort of a documentary TV producer, so very much interested in like social psychology and things, because it's so important to my work. And my biggest asset in my professional life is, in being really good at interviewing people and getting them to open up to me and things like that. So I'm very keen to learn more always about people's inner workings and what makes them tick and how they're different and how to get them to be vulnerable really quickly. And I think that the way my brain works and my internal experience is so directly linked to why I'm good at my job with people, which we can get to later. But that kind of led me to reach out, and I'd love to learn more and sort of just explore where that goes as well. I think it'd be interesting for me personally, but then also inform a lot of my work. So, yeah.
So I would say quite a few people reach out to me and say, I'm interested in your work. And most of the time I don't respond at all because there's other things in the world to do. But Mel, your email came at a time when Julian was interested in working with me, and whatever the paths crossed at a time, and you're interested in documentary, your commitment to documentary making. I think there's a documentary to be made somewhere in the inner experience world, and I don't have a documentary in mind, but I think there is 1 or 10 of them or 100 of them to be made somewhere, because I do think that people's inner experience is different, one person to the next. And I think people don't know about the characteristics of their own inner experience, probably including you, Mel, but I have no reason to believe that. I mean, maybe you're right on about your own inner experience, and maybe you're 90 degrees off or whatever. That's sort of what makes my work interesting. But there is a lot of filmmaking, documentary stuff that seeks to display inner experience. Much of it inner speaking, so people brains are talking to themselves, and that isn't the way the world is. I don't think the inner world is. So I think there's a whole realm out there of interesting possibilities that I haven't really thought about, but that's one of the ingredients as far as along with timing that made me respond to your email and got us all here today.
Cool, thank you.
So what I think the rough draft of our plan is that I will send Mel a beeper, and then we will get together and do some DES type sampling with Mel, and Julian and I will be the primary interviewers, and then we'll have conversations about that, and that those conversations could take place during the interviews or after the interviews or separate from the interviews or not at all or whatever. I don't have a specific choreography of that, but that would be the sort of the rough draft of the framework from my point of view. But I'm open to suggestions. If somebody's got a better idea, I'd be happy to hear that.
Within the context of the interviews, at least for some of the discussions, would be good. Now, I don't know if you've looked into the book DES Proponent Meets Skeptic, but it's DES interviews of one participant, Melanie, or maybe that's her pseudonym for the book. But it's you, Russ, and Eric Schwitzgebel, who's skeptical of DES, skeptical of reports of inner experience. And so they do these joint interviews, and Schwitzgebel asks some questions, and they discuss. In that format, I thought it was very interesting to be doing the interviews and discussing the samples as it goes along. And I think that could work well. There's the aspect that it might be, so we would be discussing your experience, Mel, and we might be skeptical of some things, and you'll get to see a bit more how DS works because we'll be voicing this skepticism more. Like when I interview people, I'll sometimes voice it, but sometimes I'll keep in the back of my mind, okay, maybe this isn't the case. Maybe as we train over subsequent days, we'll find that their experience is different, because that's kind of the hallmark of DES, as Russ kind of alluded to, is this skepticism. Like we go in with the expectation that none of us really knows your experience. You might have some ideas, maybe that you have more uncivilized thinking than some other people, but we could get quite different results. And so, yeah, as we go along, I guess we'll be having discussions and kind of really asking to what extent do we trust the method. So I think as long as we go in with those expectations, then I think it could work.
Yeah, I've done a couple of projects where there were discussions that go on. So the Eric Schwitzgebel in my book was 2007, I think, and then I've got another book with a literary scholar, Marco Caracciolo, which sort of takes the Melanie project one step farther. But I've also got, as you both know, I think a website that has a bunch of full interviews where I've discussed with myself or with students or whatever what I think is going on in those interviews. So I've tried to be public about that, and that might be one of the places where some of the stuff that we do here might end up as well. So I'm not saying I'm going to put that on the web, but I would say I have put a bunch of stuff on the web. I think it is of value to put the kinds of interviews that we're doing on the web, or make them public somehow, and we'll see how that goes. Any of us as we go might have a better idea of how to put them, how to make them public than I've done. The batch of interviews on the web, I think there's 8 of them now. There's each one of those is 8 or 10 interviews, and with transcripts and whatever, there's a fair amount of work involved in making those kinds of things public, and maybe not in the best way because they're sort of overwhelming. You got to ride along with 8 hours or 10 hours or whatever worth of interviewing, and then you got the transcripts to deal with, and my commentary in the transcripts, and your reaction to the transcripts, and your reaction to my commentary, and all that stuff. There's a fair amount of time involved, but I am motivated, I would say, to be transparent about what's going on. And I would also say, in response to something that Julian said, it used to be that I was sort of worried that if we had a conversation back with Melanie, and those that I don't think we involved Melanie in the conversations. And I used to worry about that, because if we involved Melanie in the conversations, then that would pollute her and her experience or something like that. But I'm not so worried about that anymore, for maybe 2 reasons. One is I don't think it actually will change Mel's experience if we talk amongst ourselves, including Mel, about that. I think her and her experience is probably stronger than our conversations about it. That's one thing. And second, if her inner experience does change as the result of our conversations, well, then so what? I mean, my inner experience is no doubt going to change as the result of our conversations, and Julian's is probably as well. That's the human interaction. I expect that we'll all be somehow altered by the conversations that we might have. And so the object wouldn't be to get to Mel the way she was on September 26th or before we started this. The object would be, I think, to try to learn something that might be interesting about something, and with the vantage point of, well, we'll start by trying to look at a few moments of Mel's experience.
Yeah, and on that, like, I'm very happy to be challenged like very regularly. So please feel free to really push and challenge anything that I report back. I welcome that. So no problems on that front. So I'm not going to take it personally if you're skeptical of some claim or something.
And I would say I think you should be involved, if you want to be in a way, you should be involved in the discussions that we have, and you should feel free to say what you think ought to be said about all those things. And I would say I speaking for myself now, would not. I don't think that you are in a position to be the authoritative, unchallenged expert. So if you say, we ask a question, we say, well, this is what we thought, and you say, no, it's not that way. I don't think that you're infallible in those kinds of things. And that's not a personal statement about Mel. I don't think I'm infallible about things. So if you say, well, I think it's this way, and I say, I think it's that way, well, that's two different people having two different perspectives on the world, and Mel has the advantage or the disadvantage, one of the two. She has a different context from what I would have, and then we'd have to take that into consideration, and we'd have to figure out what to do about that, which doesn't mean whenever Mel says something, we'd say, okay, no, that's the way it is, if that's what you say. That isn't the way the world works.
But yeah, I would love to same sort of thing that you said before, Russ, in terms of, I think there's I love how you have all the documentation very easily available on your site. I would love to somehow, from my personal experience with it, make some sort of slightly more easy to consume video from the whole thing. Like, perhaps, like, this is just, I'm thinking double-edged sword of, like, it could be nice to, at the end of all of this, have some sort of artistic or documentary endeavor that is, like, really short and perhaps a nice, like, summation of my experience and the research. So if that's something that you would be open to, like, I have no plans concrete, but I just think at the end of it, it would be really cool if you were able to have a video of the experience that was more edited.
So I think that might very well be a good idea. I would say the possibility of that is I would say maybe part of the reason why you were here today with Julian, and somebody else who got an email at more or less the same time isn't here. So I'd be open to that as a possibility. I would say it would probably be to our advantage not to start with the framework of let's try to make a documentary. I would say it would be better to start from the framework of let's try to talk honestly amongst ourselves about Mel's experience. And maybe on the third or fifth or seventh or whatever day of that, it would start to come clear to Mel or to Julian or to me or whoever that this is the way a documentary might work. We could think about that.
Yeah.
But I would rather have us start with let's be as genuinely straightforward as we can be about Mel's experience and why we ask the questions that we ask and why we don't ask those questions and why that was a bad question and why that was a bad answer and that was a good answer or a bad question or whatever. We figure out that kind of stuff.
I'm very open also to the idea. I was also thinking of the possibility of doing edited shorter versions. So I do film editing and filmmaking too. So yeah, but I definitely agree with your perspective on going in, not thinking about that.
Yep.
It might come later. But to set it up, I think it would be good to use 4K recording for these videos. I've been using this program called Zencaster that does high quality local recording. So it records locally on each person's, like from each person's device. So I think that's just a technicality that could make it go smoother if we do something with the footage down the line.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So I've got no problem with that. You just have to tell us how to do that.
It's like Zoom. You just click on a link, but then the quality is good. Editing is a bit trickier because it doesn't automatically shift the windows, but then there are AI apps like Autopod that kind of can cut up a whole interview, or just do it by hand. But yeah, that's all technicalities, I guess.
Yeah, I would say that I've been pretty happy with Zoom interviews. As far I like live, I prefer live interviews hands down all the way. But I think Zoom does a pretty good job, and I think there's some virtue in putting out the interviews the way I've done it on the web, where it's obviously sort of low grade, not 4K kind of stuff, and because that's the way it was. But
yeah, we could still have that. We could still have that option if we use this software. It's just that in addition, like if we wanted to do a different format, then that could also work. But yeah, I think just having the raw footage for people interested in the method is also really good. Just have this kind of open access data.
And I've done similar kinds of things, I think, with just the audio. So I've interviewed with some people where we both recorded high fidelity audio separately, and then somebody else put that together to make a podcast or whatever.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
So I'm in favor of that. And I would also say I don't think there's any reason why there shouldn't be more than one video, whatever perspective. Mel could see it her way, and Julian could see it his way, and Russ could see it his way, and I think everybody ought to have some kind of veto power about that kind of stuff, because we're talking about that's sort of the ground rules of being honest, but with each other. But
yes, but best to record everything as well as we can so that the options are there. Because as you said at the start, Russ, you can't get it back once it's done. So
that's right.
Yeah, cool. It sounds really great. I'm certainly very interested to be involved in. I think that I'm very grateful that you replied to my email, Russ, and that we're all here because it sounds interesting.
So what we're in agreement here is that Russ will send Mel a beeper, and Julian will tell us how we want to record these things, and then we have to think about the mechanics. So is this a reasonable time for everybody? It's 8:00 in the morning my time, 11:00 for Mel. We could do it later, as far as I'm concerned. Probably not earlier. But,
what time is it for you, Julian? You're the latest, aren't you?
For me, it's now like 5:24.
Yeah, okay.
So starting 5 or 6. I could go later too, but it's a nice time for me, I would say.
Yeah, same, Russ. If an hour later helped you, like I could do midday, but the time we started or an hour later, I think is sort of our best bet, but whatever works around this sort of slot.
Yeah, I would say that this time is okay with me. Just makes I just have to wake up, but I can deal with that.
And when we start sampling, do you think we want to do consecutive days, or I don't know, with the other video recordings, did you do a weekly thing, or did you do it every day?
Well, what my method generally is we agree to one thing, So
Yeah.
today we have agreed that we would video this and everybody would own it. And that we're going to send a beeper and whatever.
One
And
step at a time.
then we'll set a time. And then next time we'll start the whole agreement process over again from my point of view. So just because we agreed to something today doesn't mean that we're bound by that the next time around, because life changes or whatever. And when we get into sampling, Mel should have the possibility, with no recriminations or whatever, say, oh shit, I don't want to do that now that I know what my inner experience really looks like to the beeper, or what these guys are going to say about it or whatever. I don't want to be a part of that. She should have that right. And so I would say everything ought to be starting from scratch every time. Mm-hmm. And how often that generally works in practice is, I would say, this sort of once a week is the way it generally goes, but many times I've done it more frequently than that, and many times I've done it less frequently than that. So, but I would say that it's going to take me a week to get Mel a beeper, so it's
I've tried setting it up with iPhones or with smartphones, and it used to work, but now I can't get the beeps go through the earpiece. I think they changed the software. So,
so how did you set it up? Did you follow my instructions? Because I've got on the web instructions for how to do
that. Yeah, I've done those. And it used to work, especially on Androids, but on the iPhones now the alarms always go through the phone itself and not through the earphones. So it's just something annoying that when I try to do this method now, I can't figure it out.
Huh. So even setting up the alarms according to the instructions that I put up there. So you're basically putting a beep into your music file and displaying a beep as the alarm. The alarm doesn't go through your earphone.
Yeah, these days it goes through the phone itself. Maybe not interesting to Mel, but this is, one part of the method is that the beep has to go through the earpiece because it kind of solidifies the moment of experience. It makes it more accessible to the person, because they're not like thinking about, oh, it's coming from my phone now. So so for you, you'll have these legit real beepers that Hurlburt designed. But when I try to do this method, it can be these tricky practical things that.
I'm picky about the beep. I think the beep, the mechanics of the beep, the physics of the beep, the audition of the beep is a big deal. You got to have a fast rise time beep, and it has to mean nothing else other than this is the time for me to sample. Yeah. And so I've built a beeper that does that, but now everybody's got a smartphone, and so I put instructions for how to do it. And I am disappointed to hear, Julian, that it doesn't work anymore. I'll have to play around with it myself, but it's. You'd think it would be an easy thing to do, to use a very smartphone to do what my very dumb beepers do. My beepers are really quite crude, and but they're better than anything that I've been able to do on a smartphone.
There's got to be a way, but I think it might involve some programming, which, I don't really want to have to go into that. But
right.
So sorry, just quickly on that, Russ. So did you spend a lot of time finessing the beep itself?
You mean back in the day?
Yeah, like when you were first coming up with the beep, as you just mentioned, of how long it goes for, pitch and things like that. Did you do that?
I don't think I can give an honest answer to that because it's 50 some years ago now. But I think what happened, it was I built the beeper with a beep that I thought was going to be pretty good, and it turned out to be pretty good. I think that's the way it is. I don't recall, let's put it this way, I don't recall playing around with different frequencies of beeps. I had in mind what I thought a beep ought to be like, and I made it like that, and it worked.
to you.
Something like that. Don't hold me to that being a veridical account, because, well, y'all, maybe you don't, but everybody in the rest of the world knows that what I think about retrospection, which is I don't trust it, and but, including my own, or especially my own. But when I don't recall having played around with it. But I have over the years become convinced that there are features of the beep that you have to have sudden rise time, and you have to have unambiguous beep. It has to mean one thing and nothing else. Like some people will say, well, I'll try it with my phone. I'll just, when my phone rings, I'll use that as a beep. And that doesn't work, because the thought process, then you have a thought process, which is something like, oh, that's my phone. I'm not supposed to answer my phone. I'm supposed to think about what's going on with me. But by the time you go through that thought process, then you've lost most or all of what's an inner experience. So it can't be that way. But to come back to so back in the day, now that I'm thinking about it, I have played around with other kinds of beeps. So now I have a mental picture, which I think it's in my closet actually, but I've built back. So I built beepers when there weren't beepers available, and they didn't exist, and so I built vibrating things and decided that they didn't work, because the vibration is a relatively slow rise time deal. If you're interested in inner experience, you can't use any kind of a vibrating thing that I've been able to find. There's always the possibility that somebody can do a better vibrator than I can do, than I have done. But I think it takes too long for the body to process vibration. And I've also used flashing lights, and flashing lights aren't as good either. But I've never built like a glasses with LEDs in them that would flash. Maybe one could do that, but I think there's logic to saying that the auditory system has the fastest access to this kind of processing. But I've never done a really good visual beeper. So interesting.
Okay, and then I suppose, Russ, once a beeper arrives, then we'll meet back, and then you'll talk me through the logistics of that next time.
Yes, and Julian, you want to be part of that conversation? How to use a beeper? Okay. So so the mechanics of it is, I will send you a beeper. When you get the beeper, you will let us know I've got the beeper, and then we will by email figure out when we're going to do this again, and that will be what I would call the day zero. In my lexicon, day zero is when you've got the beeper in your hand, and we're going to decide exactly what we're going to do about it. And those conversations typically are 15 or 20 minutes long, but if we're going to have conversations about it, then that might be longer than that. But
cool, sounds great.
But even the conversations like today, there's a fair amount of thought or practice or trial and error or whatever that go into why this conversation is this way. I start with the conversation about the recording because I want to do the recording, but I also want to make sure that I have conveyed that the recording doesn't belong to me, this process doesn't belong to me, DES doesn't belong to me, nothing belongs to me. I'm one person on a trajectory through trying to make sense of the world. And other people are on their own trajectories trying to do the same thing. That all that is part of the DES process, actually. It might seem like a conversation, which it is a conversation, but it's also an integral part of trying to convey to Mel, who's going to be a subject in this research, that there's nothing that I'm imposing on Mel. She's got to be a free agent in this regard, and so I am walking up to my side of the chasm and saying that the Mel on the other side, well, this could be interesting. I'm going to send you a beeper. We can see whether that's interesting. Julian and I might have some conversations over there, and you might have some conversations over here. We're all sort of free agents from the ground up, basically.
Great. Sounds good to me. Happy to be involved.
All right. So anything else that we should be talking about today? And I guess, well, let me ask one more question about the mechanics of it. So it would seem to me that it would be a good idea for us not to have one-on-one conversations about this. If we want to have conversations about this, it ought to be 3-on-3 conversations.
Sure.
That makes sense.
And it's not because I don't think one-on-one conversations are a good idea, but as a general rule, but it raises the possibility of, well, if Julian and I had a conversation, then Julian and I would know something that Mel doesn't know, and then we might get into a position where, do we have to go back and tell Mel about that conversation? And that would be not that Julian and Russ would try and hide something from Mel or whatever, but it makes those conversations awkward. So I would recommend that we agree that if we're going to do this, we ought to do it as a group. And anybody else thought about that?
That makes sense to me. So we can all be involved in everything.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. But I'm also happy with whatever. If at some point you guys decide that it would be valuable for you and the research to splinter off and have conversations that I'm not privy to, then that's fine. Like whatever you think is most suitable for the best research.
Yeah, I think eventually there are these processes of coding samples, and I think you might not want to be there for all of that. But that's usually after everything. So I think for the sampling itself, I think as Russ outlined, sounds good.
And I guess I would also say in that regard, I think I said at the outset that the videotapes ought to be the property of the collective. And what I generally say about that is, this is a little bit of a different way. This is a three-way thing, which is not my usual way of operating. Usually there's three or more people involved, but all but one of them is on my team. Basically, it's people that I control, and to the extent that I control anybody. But and so what I say in that kind of what I would have said if this were my team against Mel, so it's sort of a deal, is that Mel owns the videotape. That Mel can do with the videotape whatever the hell she would like to do with the videotape. So she has 51% of the vote. And she could say to Russ, this is my inner experience. I reveal something about my experience that I don't want out there on the web for the rest of her life. No, you cannot use that video, and she should have control over that. And so, as a general rule, I would say what I do belongs to Mel. She can do with it. She can do with it whatever she wants to do with it, but I can't do whatever it is that I want to do with it because it's Mel's inner experience. But now we got sort of a three-way deal involved, and it's sort of hard for me to say. But what I'm trying to convey here is that Mel ought to be able to make whatever videotape she wants to make or show whoever it is that she wants to show, as far as I'm concerned. But now there's Julian involved, and that might not be true for Julian, and so we're trying to figure out how to deal with that.
Can't really. I might waive my veto power because I don't really see myself needing it unless I do a really terrible job as an interviewer and then think, oh, I can't have a career in academia to see how bad I am. But I'm not too concerned about that. So I might defer to Mel because this is your experience. It's more personal for you. You have more of a reason than me to want this public or not want it public. So I think to make it easier, it could give you 51%, we each have the rest or something like that.
But I think actually the way it actually works out is that it can be personal all the way around. It can be as personal for Mel as it is for Julian, or as personal for Julian as it is for Mel, or for Russ for that. It's personal in different ways because we each have different contexts and different interests and different imagined trajectories or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I think at the very least we ought to take each other into consideration. It's hard for me to imagine that I would not let you or either one of you do whatever it is that you want to do with it. If Mel were to make a video and do whatever with the video, then I would have the right, I would think, to say, well, she showed some stuff and she cut that unfairly and made me look like an idiot, which I'm only not quite that much of an idiot or whatever. I would have the right to respond if she were to do something like that, which I'm not worried that she would do that, but that would be that in my general way of doing things, that would be what 51% of the vote means. She can do whatever it is that she wants, but then I can do whatever I want with whatever it is that she wants, that she's done. And
yeah, I think everyone's on the same page of the group would tick off anything. And if anything makes anyone uncomfortable, then we raise it and take all of that into consideration. But definitely sounds like everyone agrees on that front. So I'm not worried. Thank you for your trust.
So normal, what I would really like to do is to say, I think that's good. I think that is the way we should do it here. And that is the way that I said we should do it at the beginning. So I'm in agreement with that. But what I want to say is that that's different from the way DES usually is. Whereas DES, where I explicitly say at the beginning of DES, it's your videotape. And if you want to do with it whatever it is you want to do with it, you can do that without taking into consideration, well, it might hurt my feelings or whatever. That's not that in the general rule, it's yours and you can do with it whatever you want. But here it's a different deal because there's three of us, and so I don't know exactly how to figure that out.
Yep, I'm happy with that. Of just keep it an open dialogue.
Yes.
Anything else we should be talking about today?
All good on my side.
Yeah, I don't
right. So I will send a beeper sometime the next day or couple of days, and it should arrive, I would think, by the beginning of next week. And so maybe by a week we could, I suppose, schedule a time work that out.
Perfect.
All righty. Thank you very much. Look forward to it. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Thank you. See you.
See you later.